I can't stop replaying last night in my head. Every detail is burned into my memory, like an old movie reel I can't shut off. I walked out of that family dinner without saying a word, leaving everyone behind. My parents, my siblings, my wife. They all stared after me, confused, maybe even worried. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing since, but I've silenced it. I don't know how to face them, not after what I found out. They don't know the truth, and honestly, I don't think I can bring myself to tell them. The day had started like any other. Mara, my wife of 9 years, woke up early and made coffee, humming softly as she stood by the counter in her oversized sweater. It was one of the things I loved about her, her ability to make even the simplest mornings feel warm and safe. But looking back, that hum, that smile, it all feels fake now, like she'd perfected a mask she wore just for me. "Don't forget dinner at your parents' tonight," she said, handing me my mug with a grin. "Your mom will kill us if we're late again." I nodded, sipping my coffee, unaware that those words would later feel like daggers in my chest. The first crack in the facade came around noon. I was cleaning out the car when Mara's phone, left on the passenger seat, buzzed with a notification. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. I trusted her completely, but this time, the name on the screen caught my attention. Caleb. I froze, staring at the screen as the message preview popped up. "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I unlocked the car and grabbed her phone. I knew it was wrong to look. I've always believed in respecting each other's privacy, but something inside me screamed that this wasn't normal. This wasn't just a friend texting her. Her phone was locked, of course, but that message alone was enough to send my mind spiraling. Who was Caleb? And what the hell happened last night? I tried to stay calm. I tried to convince myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was an old friend, or maybe the message wasn't meant for her. But deep down, I knew. That gut feeling you don't want to believe? It hit me like a freight train. When Mara came out to the driveway a few minutes later, smiling as she adjusted her scarf, I couldn't even look her in the eye. She leaned down to kiss my cheek, and I flinched, pretending I was busy adjusting the car seat. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice light and casual. "Yeah," I lied, avoiding her gaze. The rest of the day was a blur. I barely said a word, and Mara didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, but she was too busy pretending everything was fine. By the time we arrived at my parents' house for dinner, my nerves were shot. I kept checking my phone, debating whether I should confront her or wait. My heart raced every time she glanced at her phone, wondering if Caleb had messaged her again. As we sat around the table, passing dishes and sharing laughs, I felt like I was suffocating. Mara was the perfect picture of a loving wife, chatting with my mom and complimenting her cooking. She even reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it gently as if nothing was wrong. And that's when I saw it. Her phone, sitting face up on the counter behind her, lit up with a new message. "Caleb." I excused myself, my voice cracking, and walked into the kitchen. My hands shook as I picked up her phone, unlocking it with the code I'd seen her enter 100 times before. The message thread was right there, glaring at me like a neon sign. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. When can we meet again?" I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My vision blurred as I scrolled up, reading message after message, some flirtatious, some downright explicit. There was no doubt about it now. My wife, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, had been with someone else. My head spun as I stumbled back into the dining room. Mara looked up at me, her smile fading when she saw my expression. "Peter? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even look at her. Without a word, I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, leaving everyone staring after me in stunned silence. I don't know how long I sat in my car before driving away. The phone calls started almost immediately. My mom, my dad, my sister. Even Mara tried calling me, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Now I'm sitting here in the dark, the messages still flashing through my mind. How could she do this to me? How long has this been going on? And how am I supposed to face everyone after walking out like that? The night felt endless. I sat in my car for hours, parked in a random lot, staring at nothing. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The disbelief, The betrayal. It consumed me. The woman I had built my life around, the woman I trusted with every fiber of my being, had done this to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that name on her phone. Caleb. Who was he? How did she even meet him? Was it someone from her work, a friend I didn't know about, or worse, someone I did? My mind kept spinning through scenarios, each one worse than the last. I pulled out my own phone, scrolling through old photos of us. There was one from just a few months ago, on our anniversary trip to the mountains. We'd taken a selfie by the lake, her head resting on my shoulder, smiling at the camera like we were the happiest couple in the world. It felt like a lie now. Had she already started seeing him back then? Was she texting him while we were sitting around the campfire, laughing and sharing stories? I slammed my phone down on the passenger seat, the sharp sound cutting through the silence of the car. The anger was building, but underneath it, there was something even worse. Pain. It hurt to think that Mara could smile at me like nothing was wrong, hold my hand at dinner, and pretend we were a team, all while sneaking around with someone else. The worst part was, I still loved her. Even now, knowing what I knew, there was a part of me that wanted to believe it wasn't real, that there was some explanation I hadn't considered. Maybe I'd misunderstood the messages. Maybe Caleb was just a friend and I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew better. I checked the time, nearly midnight. I had to go somewhere, but I didn't want to go home. I couldn't face her. Not yet. My phone buzzed again, lighting up with another call from my mom. I couldn't ignore her forever. I swiped to answer, bracing myself for the questions. Peter, where are you? Are you okay? Her voice was soft, worried. I'm fine, Mom, I lied, my voice hoarse. Fine? You walked out of dinner without saying a word. Mara was so upset. She didn't know what was going on. None of us did. You scared us. Mara was upset? The irony of that hit me like a slap in the face. She had no right to be upset. Not after what she'd done. I just needed some air, I said vaguely. I'm sorry if I worried you. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could tell she wanted to press for more, but thankfully, she didn't. Peter, whatever's going on, you can talk to me, okay? Just come home. We're all here for you. Home. The word felt hollow. My home didn't feel like mine anymore. I thanked her and hung up, staring out at the empty parking lot. Eventually, I drove, aimlessly at first, until I found myself parked outside of my best friend Nathan's house. He was the only person I could trust right now, the only one who might understand. I knocked on his door, and after a few minutes, he opened it, bleary-eyed and confused. Peter? What the hell are you doing here? It's almost 1 a.m. I need to talk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't ask any questions, just stepped aside and let me in. We sat in his living room, the dim light from a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. What's going on? He asked, handing me a glass of water. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It's Mara. She's cheating on me. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, like they didn't belong to me. Saying it out loud made it real, and I wasn't ready for that. Nathan's face hardened. What? Are you sure? I nodded, pulling out my phone and showing him the messages I'd taken screenshots of earlier. He read them in silence, his expression growing darker with each line. That's messed up, man, he said finally, setting the phone down. Have you confronted her? No, I couldn't. Not at dinner, not in front of everyone. I had to get out of there. Nathan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. I can't go back there. Not tonight. I don't even know if I can face her at all. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Nathan offered to let me crash on his couch, and I accepted. It wasn't much, but it was better than being alone. As I lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, the questions kept coming. Why did she do it? How long had it been going on? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? Morning crept in slowly, and I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed those messages. Caleb. That name had become a trigger, an open wound I couldn't stop prodding. The weight of it all was unbearable, but the new day brought an unwelcome reality. I had to face it. I couldn't stay on Nathan's couch forever. Nathan walked into the living room, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like hell, man," he said, handing me one. "Feel worse than I look," I muttered, staring at the rising steam from the cup. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" he asked, sitting down across from me. I shook my head. How am I supposed to decide anything? She's my wife, Nathan. I've spent 9 years building a life with her. And now, I don't even know who she is. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "You need answers, Peter. Avoiding her isn't going to fix this. If you want the truth, you have to confront her." Confront her. The idea made my stomach churn. What would I even say? How do you look someone in the eye, someone you've loved for nearly a decade, and ask them why they betrayed you? After Nathan left for work, I sat on his couch for what felt like hours, trying to work up the courage to go home. My phone buzzed on the table, and I hesitated before picking it up. Another call from Mara. I stared at her name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button, but I couldn't do it. Instead, I did something I hadn't done before. I opened her social media. Scrolling through her posts was like stepping into an alternate reality. Pictures of us smiling at barbecues, anniversaries, vacations, each one felt like a cruel joke now. But then I noticed something strange. In a photo she'd posted 2 weeks ago, she was at a coffee shop, smiling with a group of people I didn't recognize. One of them stood out, a tall, dark-haired man sitting close to her. Caleb. I recognized him from the profile picture attached to his messages. My blood ran cold. Clicking on his profile, I scrolled through his photos, my heart pounding with each one. He wasn't just some random guy. He worked in her office. There were group photos of their team, holiday parties, and even a picture of the two of them standing too close for comfort during an after-work outing. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some fleeting fling. He was part of her daily life. I closed the app and sat there in silence, the anger bubbling up again. I felt like a fool. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to my face, telling me she had late meetings or team-building events? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and headed home. The drive felt surreal, like I was floating outside my own body. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were trembling. Mara's car was in the garage, and through the window, I could see her pacing in the living room. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. She looked up immediately, her face a mix of relief and worry. "Peter, where have you been? I've been trying to call you all night." I didn't respond. I walked past her and set my keys on the counter, trying to steady my nerves. "Peter, talk to me. What's going on?" she pressed, her voice trembling. I turned to face her, my heart pounding. "Who is Caleb?" Her face went pale. For a moment, she froze, like a deer caught in headlights. Then she tried to recover, forcing a shaky laugh. "Caleb? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb with me, Mara," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "I saw the messages. I saw everything." Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for an excuse, but none came. Finally, she sighed and sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "So it's true? You've been cheating on me?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what you think, Peter. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and it's complicated?" She reached out as if to touch my hand, but I stepped back, the anger bubbling over. "How long, Mara? How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her lip trembling. "A few months," she admitted finally, "but it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, Peter, I swear." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and cold. "A mistake? You call months of betrayal a mistake?" She started sobbing, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, was a stranger to me now. "I need some time to think," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't follow me." I walked out the door again, leaving her crying on the couch. This time, I didn't look back. I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving the house. The betrayal was like a fire inside me, burning away at every happy memory I had of Mara. Her confession played over and over in my head. A few months. The words felt like acid, eating away at the foundation of my trust. I found myself parked at a small diner on the edge of town. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an older waitress with tired eyes. I ordered a coffee, but I didn't drink it. My hands were shaking too much to hold the cup steady. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to feel everything. The anger, the pain, the humiliation. How could she do this to me? To us? We had built a life together, shared dreams, made promises. And now, it felt like all of it had been for nothing. I thought about the times she'd come home late, claiming she had to stay at work to finish a project. I thought about the weekends when she'd say she needed time to herself and would leave for hours, her phone always just out of reach. It all made sense now. Every moment I'd brushed off as paranoia was actually a red flag. My mind kept going back to Caleb. What kind of man was he? Did he know she was married? Did he care? Or was he just as deceitful as she was? The thought of him with her, laughing with her, touching her, made my blood boil. But more than anger, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. The woman I married was gone. Or maybe she had never been who I thought she was. I stared out the diner window as the sun began to rise, casting a dull light over the parking lot. I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. Eventually, I'd have to go back and face whatever was left of my marriage. The waitress refilled my coffee and gave me a sympathetic smile. "Rough night?" she asked softly. "Something like that," I muttered. She nodded, not pressing further, and walked away. Her kindness felt almost unbearable. I left a few dollars on the table and headed back to my car, my stomach churning. I didn't know what I was going to do, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep running. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I saw Mara sitting on the front steps. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up as I got out of the car, her expression a mix of hope and dread. "Peter," she began, her voice trembling. I held up a hand to stop her. "Not now," I said, my tone cold and final. I walked past her and into the house, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. But as I stepped into the living room, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Her phone was sitting on the coffee table, unlocked, and it was still buzzing. Messages from Caleb kept popping up, one after another. "I'm worried about you. Did you tell him? Let me know if you're okay. I miss you already." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Even now, after everything, she was still in contact with him. Mara walked in behind me, her voice soft. "Peter, please, let me explain." I turned to face her, the anger boiling over again. "Explain what? That you're still texting him? That you're still lying to me?" She froze, her eyes darting to her phone. Her guilt was written all over her face. "I told him it was over," she said quickly. He's not letting go." I laughed bitterly. "Not letting go? That's what you're going with." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "I can't do this, Mara. Not right now." Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll give you space. But please, Peter, just don't give up on us." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my keys again and walked out the door, needing to escape the chaos that had once been my life. I drove with no destination in mind, the quiet hum of the car the only thing grounding me. My mind was in overdrive, cycling between anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. Every word Mara said echoed in my head. "I'll give you space." Space? That's what she thought I needed. What I needed was honesty, respect, the truth. All things she had taken from me the moment she let Caleb into our lives. The early morning air was crisp, and the world around me was waking up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my world had just ended. I pulled into a small park and sat on a bench overlooking the lake. It was peaceful here, the kind of place I used to come to clear my head. But today, it offered no solace. I stared at the water, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? Pack up and leave? Stay and try to fix things? The thought of Mara and Caleb, of the lies and the betrayal, made the idea of staying feel unbearable. But leaving? That felt impossible too. This was my life. My home. I thought about the conversations we'd had over the years, about buying our first house, starting a family, growing old together. Were those just words to her? Did any of it mean as much to her as it did to me? I reached for my phone, debating whether to call someone, anyone, for advice. But who would I call? My parents? They'd be devastated to hear about this. My friends? They'd all tell me to leave her, no hesitation. But it wasn't that simple. Scrolling through my contacts, my finger hovered over Nathan's name. He'd been supportive last night, but I couldn't keep unloading on him. Instead, I found myself opening the messages I'd screenshotted from Mara's phone. Caleb's words stared back at me, mocking me. Last night was amazing. I miss you. When can I see you again? I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to throw my phone into the lake. The thought of him still reaching out to her made my blood boil. What kind of man carries on with a married woman, knowing the destruction he's causing? The anger finally became too much to bear. I stood up, got back in my car, and drove straight to Mara's workplace. I didn't know what I planned to do when I got there, but I needed to see this Caleb for myself. Her office building was bustling with activity as I parked across the street and watched people come and go. I felt ridiculous, sitting there like some kind of detective, but I couldn't help it. I needed to put a face to the name that had ruined my marriage. And then, I saw him. He walked out of the building, tall and confident, his dark hair slicked back. He was younger than I expected, probably in his early 30s. He had the kind of smug look that made my skin crawl. I felt a surge of anger, but I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. What would I even say to him? Confronting him here would only cause a scene, and I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I snapped a photo of him with my phone. It felt invasive, but I needed something. Some kind of evidence to remind myself that this was real. That this man, standing there without a care in the world, was the one who had come between Mara and me. I drove away before he could notice me, my heart pounding in my chest. The sight of him had made everything feel so much worse. He wasn't just a name on a screen anymore. He was real, and he was part of my life whether I wanted him to be or not. When I got back home, Mara was still there, sitting on the couch with her head in her hands. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen. "Where did you go?" she asked softly. I ignored her question and sat down across from her, staring at her like I was seeing her for the first time. "Why him, Mara? Why Caleb?" She flinched at his name, like it physically hurt to hear it. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice breaking. "It wasn't planned, Peter. It just happened." "That's not an answer," I said, my tone sharp. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "He was there when I felt lost, when I felt like we were drifting apart." Her words hit me like a slap. Drifting apart? And you didn't think to tell me that? To talk to me instead of turning to him? "I didn't know how," she whispered. "That's a cop-out," I snapped, standing up. "You didn't know how to talk to your own husband, but you knew how to start an affair?" She started crying again, but I didn't feel any sympathy this time. Her tears didn't mean anything to me anymore. "I need you to pack a bag and leave," I said, my voice cold and firm. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Peter, please." "Don't," I cut her off. "You've already said enough." For the first time since this started, I felt like I had some control. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mara sat frozen, her breath hitching. "Peter, please. Don't do this." I clenched my jaw, refusing to let her tears sway me. "You already did this, Mara. The moment you decided to lie to me. Now pack a bag and leave." She looked around the house as if searching for something, maybe a reason to stay. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered. I crossed my arms. "I don't care." Her face crumpled, but I held my ground. This wasn't my problem anymore. She made her choice. After what felt like forever, she finally stood up, her steps unsteady as she walked toward our bedroom. I followed her, standing in the doorway as she pulled out a small suitcase and started tossing clothes inside. "I never wanted to hurt you," she murmured. I scoffed. "And yet, here we are." She turned to face me, her eyes pleading. "Can't we at least try to fix this?" I let out a hollow laugh. You weren't thinking about fixing things when you were sneaking around with him. Mara flinched, zipping up the suitcase. For a moment, I thought she was going to fight me on this. But instead, she walked past me, dragging her bag behind her. As she reached the front door, she paused. Do you hate me? I took a deep breath, my chest aching. I don't even know who you are anymore. She nodded, wiping at her face, then stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty space she left behind, feeling both relief and an unbearable weight settle over me. The house had never felt so quiet. The silence in the house was suffocating. I stood there, staring at the front door long after Mara had walked through it. The echoes of our last conversation played over and over in my mind. She was gone. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was exhaustion. I dragged myself to the couch and sank into it, staring at nothing. The weight of everything pressed down on me, threatening to crush me. My phone vibrated on the table, breaking the quiet. I glanced at the screen. Nathan. I hesitated before answering. Yeah. Dude, what happened? His voice was sharp, urgent. Mara just called me, crying her eyes out. I exhaled, rubbing my temple. I told her to leave. Nathan was silent for a moment. So, that's it? What else am I supposed to do? I snapped. Pretend none of this happened? Act like my wife didn't just cheat on me for months? I'm not saying that, Nathan said carefully. I just want to make sure you're okay. I wasn't. But I wasn't about to admit that. I'll be fine, I muttered. Nathan sighed. Listen, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but don't let her twist things. She might try to make herself the victim. I let out a bitter laugh. She already did. Told me she felt lost, and that she didn't know how to talk to me. Nathan groaned. Classic. Like that justifies what she did. I don't care anymore, I lied. I just want to move on. Another pause. Do you? I swallowed hard. I have to. We didn't say much after that. Just a few more exchanges before I hung up, staring at my phone like it held the answers to everything. But there were no answers. Just more questions. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. I had done what I needed to do. But why did it still hurt so much? The first few days after Mara left were heavy. The house felt hollow, like a place stuck in time. Every room carried a memory. Every quiet moment was filled with the weight of what had happened. But something strange happened as the days stretched on. I started to feel lighter. For the first time in years, I had no one to answer to. No lingering doubts, no late night wondering if my wife was really working late or with someone else. The pain was still there, sure, but there was something else growing in its place. Clarity. One morning, I woke up and realized I had slept through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. That was the moment I knew I was moving forward. I threw myself into things I had neglected for too long. Working out, fixing up the house, reconnecting with old friends. Nathan dragged me out for drinks one night, and instead of sitting in the corner sulking, I actually laughed. It felt strange at first, but then it felt good. One afternoon, I found myself at the same lake where I had sat that night after leaving the house. But this time, the weight in my chest was gone. The air smelled fresher. The water looked clearer. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living again. Mara reached out a few times, but I never responded. I had nothing left to say. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just didn't care. And then, the unexpected happened. I met someone. Her name was Claire, and she was nothing like Mara. She didn't play mind games, didn't hide her phone like it held government secrets. She was warm, open, and had this way of making even the simplest conversation feel meaningful. We met at a bookstore of all places. She accidentally bumped into me, knocking a book out of my hand. We laughed, started talking, and before I knew it, we were sitting in a cafe, losing track of time. It wasn't love at first sight. I wasn't that naive anymore. But it was something real, something honest. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward.